Let's talk about the problem of God's omniscience. If you just put it into the internet, you might see people calling it the problem of God's foreknowledge. Foreknowledge and omniscience are not the same thing, but they are closely related. Foreknowledge is when you know something in advance, when you know something before. So before it even happened, you already knew. Is that even possible? That's a really good question. Is foreknowledge even possible? Like, can you know something before it happens, or is that called something else? Good question. Put it aside. Omniscience means that you have all the knowledge. You have perfect knowledge. You know everything. Past, present, and future. So omniscience, the idea of perfect knowledge, may include foreknowledge. In other words, foreknowledge, knowing something before it happens, might be a way of being omniscient, which means you have perfect knowledge. There is a being that's described as being omniscient and having foreknowledge, and that's God. People who believe in God, theists, call, or at least some of them, call God omniscient, meaning that God knows everything, including things in the future that haven't happened yet to us, like things that we don't know happened yet because in time they haven't happened yet, but God's outside of time and is eternal, and so God knows everything that has happened and will happen, so he has foreknowledge. Okay, omniscience, again, is to possess complete knowledge, past, present, future. Foreknowledge means you know things in the future. Now, many theists believe that God has this. And that's what they criticize. A atheist, someone who rejects the existence of God, but also an agnostic, someone who's not sure if God exists, might say to the theist who believes in an omniscient God, wait a minute, so how do you explain free will? The problem of God's omniscience is a challenge to the theist to explain how it is the case that humans have free will. So the challenge is something like this. Look, either this idea of God that you have, this omniscient, foreknowledge, possessing being exists, or you have free will. They add on to this that you definitely have free will. Like, you can choose things. And therefore, God can't exist. It's not that no God could exist, but it's this idea that the definition of God that you have, which includes God as knowing everything, can't exist because they can't both exist, and we know that free will exists. And that's the challenge to the theist who wants to say, no, God really does exist, and he really does know everything, complete knowledge. So here's the statement in another way. Read this pink with me. God is incompatible with free will. In other words, you can't have both. It's one or the other. They are incompatible. If this world includes free will and you can make choices and you could act against what you chose in the moment, then God can't already know what you were going to choose. The idea that God already knows everything does not make sense if you have free will as a human being. So you are being challenged as a theist to explain how God really does exist as an omniscient being, and human beings really are free to make their own choices. So that's what the challenge is. That's the problem for theists of God's omniscience or foreknowledge. So here it is, by definition. We're saying that in the past, say before you were born, say before your mother who gave birth to you was born, say before your grandmother bore your mother who bore you, before your grandmother was even born, God already knew that you were going to have a daughter and you were going to name her Sophia in the future, right? Like, your mom's not born yet, you're not born yet, you're not pregnant yet, but God already knows that you will name your daughter Sophia. So in what sense are you free to name your daughter Monica if it's a fact that you will name her Sophia? That's basically getting at the problem. So here it is in example form. If God knows that I will name my daughter Sophia, then it's necessary that I will name my daughter Sophia. Let's pause here. We're assuming something in that premise. This is a premise conclusion. Excellent argument. But there's assumption there's an assumption for premise one. The assumption is that knowledge is factive, that you can only know facts, that you can't know something that is not true, in other words. We're assuming that if God knows that I name my daughter Sophia, then I have to name my daughter Sophia. So if you think something that's false, you can't know it. You can only know it if it's true. You can only know what is a fact. So if something is not true, then you can't know it. And if somebody knows it, then it's true. And God is somebody, and if God knows that I'm going to name my daughter Sophia, then it's necessary that I do. Because if I didn't, it wouldn't be true. But God knows it, so it must be true. So it's necessary. It's necessary that I name my daughter Sophia if God knows that I will. And let's follow that line of reasoning and see where it takes us. Here's the next premise, if it's necessary that I will name my daughter Sophia, then I'm not free to name her anything other than Sophia. So when my mom's finally born, and then I'm finally born, and then I finally get married, and then I finally get pregnant, and me and my husband are sitting there and we're talking like, what do we name her if it's a girl? It's a fact that one of us will suggest Sophia and will agree and will name our daughter Sophia. It's a fact. So in what sense are we free? And that's the problem of God's foreknowledge, or in other words, the problem of God's omniscience. The problem is that if God already knows, then in what sense am I free to do otherwise? It seems like I'm not free to do otherwise. What I name my daughter is the effect of something in the past. So we can't change things in the past, right? No, we can't. And in the past, God already knew that I was going to name my daughter Sophia. So when it comes to the present moment, there's already a fact of the matter. I can't do otherwise. And if I can't do otherwise, if it's necessary, then in what sense am I free? So the problem of God's omniscience is a challenge posed to the theist, asking the theist to explain how free will could exist in a world where there is this omniscient God. The idea is that God is existing is incompatible with our free will. It doesn't have to be about God, but the problem of God's omniscience is about God. We can also put it in scientific terms. If all of our lives is just a cause and effect, you're a product of your environment and previous causes and effects going back to the Big Bang, then you're not freely doing anything. You're just a bundle of dispositions that were the effect of some previous cause. So these two debates are pretty similar.